off when I don't
I'll
worry.
mute myself while I'm eating my crunchy nut cornflakes. They're not actually my crunchy nut cornflakes, they're Drew's.
Oh.
Being
Has he counted
thrown
them?
out.
It's a dangerous game.
Say that again, Steve.
Has he counted them? Better be careful. He might have counted them beforehand.
You might have done. Well, I've done it now.
There might be a serial killer.
I count my crunchy nut cornflakes because I'm Marie Nixon sometimes.
No way.
Easy,
What a
Right,
liberty.
Hello.
Oh, what a fucking
Hello.
liberty.
Hello, Stu. Hello.
Hi.
Are we all stuffing dinner down our necks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've just finished mine. Mr.
Don't worry, there's nothing graphic coming up that'll make you
It's all right up there.
No.
Earl.
Oh,
I don't think. No.
I think
It's
it's
a
a
sauce.
sauce.
And this is us.
Is
Veronica's
this
trying
it?
to make it this week.
Right.
Okay.
I need to get comfy.
Sue, we're recording as well. Just to let you know, so you can, if you don't speak, you won't come onto it. So it'll be mostly Steve.
The sound of munching in the background.
Yeah.
Let me go.
I'll keep quiet then.
Mute myself. So yeah.
Not if you've had a couple of glasses of wine already, you won't.
First one.
Oh, just yeah, give it half an hour.
Right. I'll share screen.
For those fab ladies.
Everybody see it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, thank you.
That's Sylvia. Folks, right, kick off then. Just before the 1906 general election, at a huge Liberal Party rally, a suffragette asked the question of the main speaker, who was Winston Churchill, who was well known for his particular insulting attitude towards women's suffrage. Will the Liberal government give women the vote? He just ignored her. The Votes for Women banner in her hand was snatched from her, but then some of the men in the audience demanded an answer. And the chairman invited the suffragette to ask the question from the platform. Churchill took her roughly by the arm and forced her into a seat on the platform, saying, "No, you must wait here till you have heard what I have to say." And then told the audience, "Nothing would induce me to vote for giving women the franchise." Suddenly, all the men on the platform stood up, blocking the suffragette from view, while others pushed her into a back room and locked her in. She ran to the barred window and called out to people in the street. The crowd pointed out a window with some bars missing, which the suffragette climbed through and then, at the crowd's request, delivered an impromptu speech of her own. 42 years later, and 20 years after all women in Britain had won the right to vote, Winston Churchill was still in the House of Commons. On the road outside was a 62-year-old woman in a group holding placards demanding an end to British colonialism in Africa. In both instances, that woman was Sylvia Pankhurst. There's an exhibition at the moment at the British Library. It's called Unfinished Business, the Fight for Women's Right exhibition. Sylvia gets two mentions. One is the scandal caused by her illegitimate child, and the other is a display of her painting that she did of women's workplaces in the early 20th century. So out of the Pankhurst, she's not unknown, but she's usually the most obscure of them, except for she did have a younger sister who wasn't as involved. And the reason for this is that she moved the focus of her activity from the Women's Social and Political Union, which was founded by her mother and elder sister, and moved on to other campaigns throughout her life. So she was sort of written out of the initial suffrage movement. Right, the Pankhurst family. Both her parents, Emmeline, her mother, and father Richard, both came from radical liberal families in Manchester. In the 1880s, both of them moved from liberalism towards socialism of the Fabian variety. The Fabians were a reformist group who wanted a gradual change to socialism. And then later, they actually joined the Independent Labour Party, the ILP, when it was formed in 1893. Her father, Richard, actually stood for election several times, in the early years as a radical, and then for the ILP. But the whole family became involved in the campaign for women's suffrage. They actually had two boys as well, but both died young. Harry and the other one whose name, Francis, that was it, Francis. Christabel was the eldest and Adela was the youngest. And at this time, Sylvia showed a talent, an artistic talent, and actually won 2 scholarships to the Royal College of Art, which was pretty rare at the time for women. And when she was there, of course, she pushed for equal treatment for the women students. Women students weren't allowed to go into life classes at the time. And so Sylvia just ignored that and went in and changed the, changed the rules that way. Oh yeah, that's it. Women's Social and Political Union. That was the name of the group formed by her mother and sister. Sylvia used her artistic talent and designed badges and posters, and as you can see there, the membership card. And that little portcullis was given to suffragettes who had been imprisoned. In the early years, because of the family's links with the Independent Labour Party, the Women's Social and Political Union was actually linked to the Labour movement. But Christabel especially, after her father Richard died, wanted to focus solely on women's suffrage. Sylvia was first imprisoned in 1906, and then at the height of the campaign in 1913-14 was in and out of Holloway 13 times, which is more than any other suffragette. And like many other suffragettes, she went on hunger strike and was force-fed. Christabel, on the other hand, stayed in Paris at that time to avoid arrest. So there was different approaches. Right from the beginning, Sylvia undertook a tour in which she interviewed women workers and painted them at work, with the idea of producing a book dealing with the work of women in a large number of trades. And there you can see some of her paintings of working women. She did it in Glasgow, Nottingham, various other places. This is in contrast to Christabel and her mother, who wanted the WPSU to be a respectable middle-class campaign for women and campaign for the vote on the same basis of men. At that time, 2/3 of men didn't have the vote because it was based on property qualification. But Sylvia always campaigned for votes for all women over 21, which in effect was a call for universal suffrage. In 1911, she went on a tour of the United States. A year before, her mother had gone to the United States, and had mainly gone to nice clubs and gone to banquets and saw people of influence and affluence, whereas Sylvia visited striking women, Native American reservations, and then, against the advice of everybody, went into the South and spoke out against the Black oppression there. When she returned, it was what was happening in Britain was the Great Unrest, which was a wave of strikes that took place just before World War One. The women's, the WPSU criticised striking workers, saying they should concentrate on voting to address their grievances, and then accused them of putting increased burden on their wives through striking. But this sort of was shown to be untrue when many of the wives who were also working also went on strike. In 1913, the WPSU stepped up its campaign from window smashing, which had been the main focus, to arson. Christabel, as I said before, relocated to Paris to avoid arrest. She tried to persuade Sylvia to try to burn down Nottingham Castle, because she'd read that some Chartists had tried that in 100 years before. But Sylvia thought it was a stupid idea and refused. So this led to the expulsion of Sylvia from the WSPU. And sorry, I'll have to stop a minute. Go on. Go on. Sorry about that. So, where are we? First tour of the States, Great Unrest. She'd formed the East London Federation of the WSPU in 1912, and in 1913, she's support of the Dublin dock strike, and James Larkin, who was imprisoned. This was like the end for Christabel. This was taking it all too far, and Sylvia continued to campaign amongst working class women and men, and supported strikes and organised women's health support. But Christabel came to believe that the election of a Conservative government was the best chance of gaining the vote. And in contrast to Sylvia, she also supported the Ulster Unionists in Ireland. So Sylvia and all of the East London Federation were expelled. And there's a quote from Christabel who said those to Sylvia that a working woman's movement was of no value. Christabel saw working women as well, unintelligent and not able to articulate themselves. And then her mother, Emmeline, sent her a letter which said, "You are unreasonable, always have been, and I fear always will be. I suppose you were made so," which is actually pretty accurate at that time. So the East London Federation became the East London Federation of Suffragettes and went out on its own. They produced a paper called the Women's Dreadnought that was edited by Sylvia, and she wrote many of the articles. There's the picture there is her speaking outside the headquarters, and the one below is her actually painting the sign. So she did all sorts, Sylvia, not just, she weren't just a leader sat in a room, she actually got her hands dirty. By this time, the WSP was in decline, and a lot of members had left because of Christabel's autocratic control, and she became obsessed with sexual morality. And you can see the rapidly diverging views. On the one hand, you've got the Woman's Dreadnought, which was a paper, which is just like a normal newspaper, where the Suffragette, edited by Christabel, always had pictures, bold front with women in great Greek gowns and holding torches or whatever, or in armour, and they often had a Joan of Arc on the front. They saw it, the Christabel saw that middle-class women should show the way and gain the vote, and then they could worry about everybody else. So, the Great War. Just before this, Christabel had written a book called The Great Scourge, which centered on the moral panic at the time around venereal disease and prostitution. And her slogan was "Votes for women, chastity for men." She claimed that 80% of men had gonorrhea, and that was the cause of them not wanting women to have the vote. Sylvia, on the other hand, wrote a piece in the Woman's Dreadnought, which basically was about venereal disease, prostitution, etc., but from the woman's point of view, which highlighted basically why women ended up in prostitution due to poor wages, poor living conditions, etc. Yeah, well, the Great War. So you get the Suffragette with the German eagle ravaging a young child, which was the one of the propaganda things at the time. Whereas the Woman's Dreadnought went the other way. Emmeline and Christabel supported the war, suspended their agitation for the vote. They struck a deal with the Liberal government to end all disruption, and in return got a sum of money to fund their paper and their pro-war stance. And Sylvia was explicitly against the war. And in 1914, there was, and 1915, there was attacks on German shops in London and anti-German rioting. And Sylvia in the Women's Dreadnought wrote, "How strange. British transport workers, trade union men are called upon to shoot down German transport workers. And it's not so very long ago, in the time of our industrial war, I mean the Great Dock Strike, when we were fighting the large ship owners, we received with joy the news that these same men had sent us £5,000 to help us in our fight for better conditions. We said we would never forget their kindness. Let us keep our word by treating all those German workers who are left behind in our midst with civility." She always argued that workers should not attack each other on the basis of different nationality. And the picture there is very stark. It's a patriotism is not enough, which was what Edith Cavell, who was an executed nurse, said. But they turned it round to, as you can see, there's two soldiers fighting over and underneath the feet of the dead bodies, there's a woman nursing a dead son or husband or whatever. So it's showing the horrors of what's happening. So rather than just campaign against the war, the East London Federation Suffragettes actually did practical things. Now, Sylvia was at first, a bit concerned because, as it says there, she said, organised relief, even the kindest and most understanding, might introduce some savour of patronage or condensation and mar our affectionate comradeship in which we are all equals. She always wanted people to, she wanted to help people to help themselves as a collective. So, but she ended up, because so many women were coming to the headquarters of the ELFS, they decided to do stuff. So they did a cost price restaurant where what it says, you could go and get a meal for the price of the ingredients, basically. And Sylvia's on one of the tables there. She also started a women's toy factory for women who were unemployed, find it difficult with the men in the army, and that was run as a cooperative. And every Christmas there was the Christmas peace party. So, and then this, as the war went on, the women's dreadnought was renamed the Workers' Dreadnought, and its slogan was Socialism, Internationalism, Votes for All. Whereas the Suffragette, edited by Christabel, became the Britannia in 1915, and that slogan was for King, for Country, for Freedom. So you can see how far apart they were drifting at this time. And in as the war dragged on, there was increasing strikes in Britain, engineers, miners. There was a shop stewards movement, and there was a Glasgow rent strike led by women, which Sylvia went up to Glasgow to support, and that was attacked. But the Glasgow dockers, who were came out in and went on strike in support of the women, because the rents were going up, and the prices were going up, but wages were stagnant. In May 1918, in March 1916, the Workers' Suffrage Federation was formed, and then later called the Workers' Socialist Federation. It's quite handy that all the workers, women, suffrage, socialists, you don't have to change your initials much. Quite handy that. Then in 1917 was the Russian Revolution, and Sylvia welcomed the news of this in February. It was February Revolution. It was actually March the 8th on International Women's Day, because the Russians had a different calendar at that time. And she noted in the paper that it was started by women textile workers who went on strike, who then went into delegations and called out the men. So it was the women on International Women's Day who actually began the process that ended up with the February Revolution. It was actually welcomed by the British establishment, who were still a bit embarrassed that they were fighting under the guise of freedom when one of their allies was one of the most oppressive regimes in the world. So the British establishment thought that with this they would have some sort of democratic parliamentary system and hopefully stay in the war. But Sylvia was one of the first that recognised the situation in Russia was one of dual power. So you had the provisional government under Kerensky, and then you had the Soviets, and both could not last together. And she predicted that something had to change and a further revolution. And of course, in October, that's when the Bolsheviks seized power. So in Britain, those who had supported the February Revolution, usually they faded away. the Labour Party, which was very pro-February Revolution, was very anti the October one, and a lot of other people who were sort of for the Soviets suddenly realised what they really were. And so the Workers' Socialist Federation initiated the People's Russian Information Bureau to give more information about what was actually happening in Russia, and also to work with the Hands Off Russia campaign, etc., that had started up. Because now Kerensky was actually in Britain urging the British government to intervene in Russia. So after that, the Workers' Socialist Federation actually reformed itself in 1920 to become the first communist party in Britain. It was called the Communist Party, BSTI, which stands for British Section of the Third International. There were several actually groups who all claimed to be the Communist Party at this time. So there was the one called the Communist Party of Great Britain. There was the British Socialist League and the British Socialist Party, and all claiming to have more or less the same politics, and all wanting to be the official recognised group. Sylvia went to Moscow with the others, and basically they were told that they all had to merge into one communist party. Sylvia didn't like this idea because they were also told that they had to try and work or join the Labour Party and go through the parliamentary process. And Sylvia, by this time, was very much for the idea of Soviets, of a different kind of organisation. So she was very reluctant to give that up. She was persuaded that they could work to get the various groups could work together. So she actually joined the Communist Party of Great Britain. But in 1921, she was attacked by Lenin in his pamphlet, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. She was there was a whole section on her and what she was doing in Britain, as well as another section on another prominent woman, Rosa Luxemburg. Then she was told that she had to hand over the Workers' Dreadnought to become the official organ of the Communist Party, and it would be run by the Communist Party committee or whatever. She refused to do that and was consequently expelled from the CPGB. Sylvia always objected to the idea of marriage and taking her husband's name. It's thought she had an affair with Keir Hardie before the First World War. There's nothing sort of officially said that. I mean, Keir Hardie was actually married at the time, but they were very, very close, and people sort of think the relationship might have been sexual. But near the end of the First World War, she began living with an Italian anarchist called Sylvia Pankhurst. He'd escaped from Italy and was living in London. They were together, they lived together, and in 1927, at the age of 45, she gave birth to a son, Richard. At that point, her mother stopped talking to her and never spoke to her again, because for her mother to have a child out of wedlock was horrendously horrible and a crime and everything. And she asked Sylvia who the father was, and she would never tell anybody who the father was. Everybody who knew her knew it was Sylvia, but she never gave up the name to anybody. She said, it's basically none of your business. And she just said, it's somebody who I care and I've loved for a long time. So from that one, from a disillusionment with how the Communist Party had gone and the direction taken by Lenin and the Bolsheviks, who are now the heads of the Third International, she recognized early on the threat caused by the rise of Mussolini and fascism. She started to campaign against the rise, both in this country and in abroad. She was always linked her campaigns to international concerns. She complained about Italian fascists from Italian living in London who would regularly have parades and attack those who they saw as anti-fascists. So she predicted that the spread of fascism. The British government was very pro-Mussolini at the time. They saw him as a bulwark against communism. They saw him pulling Italy together from chaos into some sort of ordered, proper state, and they admired the way he could control the unions, etc. And they were turning a blind eye to anything else because they saw him as a potential ally. Even when, with the rise of Hitler, they still thought of Mussolini as a potential ally against Hitler. Sylvia, though, constantly spoke out against this policy and warned of the consequences of it. Brings us on to the next thing she did, the Ethiopia. Now, this sort of in 1935, the Italians actually invaded Ethiopia. They'd had the eye on it for a long time. They'd actually tried to invade in the 19th century, but had been beaten badly by the Ethiopians. But this time, they did invade successfully. They used mustard gas and all sorts against the Ethiopians. And Sylvia took up the cause of the people of Ethiopia. And she was constantly monitored by MI5. And the British government gave tacit support to the Italian invasion. Basically, the British government's attitude was, well, it's not to do with us. It won't affect us in any way. So we'll just let them get on with it. Everyone needs a colony, don't they? And they haven't got many and things like that. This appalled, like I say, Sylvia. Haile Selassie actually escaped from Ethiopia to Britain, and Sylvia became a sort of advisor to him. When he went back to Ethiopia after it was liberated by segregated South African forces, which Sylvia found appalling as well, he wasn't allowed to resume his previous position. It was basically run as a colony for a while until about 1947. Sylvia got really interested in Ethiopian culture, and she used the idea, the Ethiopian campaigns to widen out against the whole idea of colonialism. She supported all the colonial movements for independence in Africa. And there she is outside the House of Commons protesting. She actually went to live in Ethiopia with Richard after Sylvia's death in 1954 at the invitation of Haile Selassie, and she became an advisor. She established a newspaper and supported the Ethiopian people. It may seem weird that Haile Selassie his title was actually emperor, but Sylvia actually made it clear to him that she didn't agree with that, and she wanted change in Ethiopia as well. But from her perspective, Ethiopia was the only independent African state, and she was more anti-colonial than she was anti-emperor, if you like. And she actually died in Ethiopia in 1960, and she was given a state funeral, and that's her tombstone, which is in Addis Ababa. She's treated there as a Ethiopian hero. So Sylvia Pankhurst, conclusion. She was a humble woman. She always lived simply, and she sought to empower those without. She made a wide-ranging contribution to British and radical politics, and has been frequently overlooked. Only a few of her campaigning efforts are known. I mean, like I said at the beginning, she moved from one campaign to another. She never stood still, sort of thing. So while she seemed to adopt different causes, there is a line, a link between them. And usually the line was the right for people to determine their own lives in a more directly democratic system, whichever that might be. And so she at first it was votes for women, votes for all. Then it was the idea of, she brought forward the idea of household Soviets for working women, and industrial democracy and things like that. And while doing all this, for most of her life, she edited a radical weekly newspaper, which actually was self-sustaining and actually kept going under conditions of censorship, and even during her imprisonment and constant police raids. She managed to commission leading journalists from around the world and used her paper to give voice to the marginalised and oppressed, and those who otherwise would not have been heard. And the fact that she was a woman newspaper editor makes it pretty remarkable. And the papers actually made some impressive examples of investigative journalism, but she's never mentioned in context of any journalist history of journalism or contribution to journalism, and yet she did quite a lot early on before others. And as a politics, she always identified from very early on as a socialist. She actually her father actually took her to see Eleanor Marx, Karl Marx's daughter, when she was young, and from that moment she was always identified. But she always drew in different ranges of ideas. She had the ethical socialism in her youth, which was like similar to Keir Hardie's. Then she added to that the scientific socialism of Marxism, and then on top of that, she had the libertarian ideas similar to her partner Sylvia. She never claimed to be a socialist theorist or anything like that, but she through her writing she actually contributed quite a bit, because she was committed to the idea that socialism could only come from below. In the first few decades of her life, she put this into practice. She built up different movements, and the East London Federation of Suffragettes inspired local community, and actually was well respected in the East End of London. She declared, like I said earlier, she declared to be members of the first Communist Party in Britain. And even when she became isolated from British movements later on, she always remained committed to the principle of self-determination, and was always seen herself as an internationalist and a critic of imperialism and colonialism, and tried all the time to practically assist any emerging anti-colonialist movement. So she never ever just sat back. She never just wrote pamphlets. She never just wrote articles in newspapers. She, as they say, walked the talk. She was imprisoned. She was the FBI, the MI5 kept tabs on her, called her that horrendous woman. Even later on in her life, they always kept tabs, and she was always a thorn in the side. And I think this is why she's quite important. I mean, in doing this talk, I mean, I knew some of this, but in the research, I found out so much more. And I think my admiration of her has certainly increased over the last few weeks, because, you know, although she maybe didn't always pursue the most effective strategies, or she didn't always get things right, throughout her life, she helped ordinary people speak for themselves. And that's what she always wanted to do. So that's Sylvia Pankhurst, the lesser known suffragette. Thanks. That's your lot.
No, thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Really
Right.
interesting.
And we got loads of time, haven't we?
We have, yeah, loads of time for questions.
I've got a question. Yeah, Big Gob goes first. Could you just explain, Steve? You were talking about Sylvia Pankhurst wanting to establish domestic Soviets. Could you explain what Soviets actually means in practical terms?
Well, when they emerged they first came up in Russia in 1905, and it just means council, and it's basically an organization in either a workplace, usually in a workplace, or in a community, where people get together and decide themselves on what in their situation, what the best strategy is and what they need to do. And then they send delegates to another meeting of all the Soviets, and that's the idea of a Soviet democracy. It just means council, really. In Russia in 1917, they tended to be workers, sailors, and soldiers, Soviets. And her idea was that sort of left out a lot of people, a lot of women who were, if they weren't working, were not part of it. So her idea was to have what she called a household or domestic or social Soviets, which would include local people in the area, local women who could also have a voice through that.
Right.
You know.
Thanks.
So they could belong, if they were working women, they could belong to the workplace one and the community one, sort of thing. That was her idea.
Right. So like the networks.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what she came to believe was the way to move forward, rather than through parliamentary democracy, which even though women had by that time got the vote, it was only a very small proportion of women, because it was all on property and things like that, and age as well. So the majority of women still didn't have the vote until 28, was it? Yeah, 28. And then they were disparaged because they were just called flappers, weren't they? Flappers.
Yeah.
And Christabel, during this time, was very down on young women because they were flaunting themselves in the 1920s, whereas Sylvia just went with it. Yeah.
No, I always thought, like, when I pictured a suffragette or thought of a woman who was part of the movement, I always imagined them to be like Sylvia, like accepting and, you know, like open to different women, different classes, different backgrounds, trying to help and support everyone. I didn't realize that it was more of a middle class movement, really. Like when you were talking about Emmeline and Christabel, I didn't realize that that was what it was like. I always thought it was more like what Sylvia was fighting for, really. So
yeah, initially it was more like that, but it just they wanted it. It's why when you see pictures of suffragettes, they're dressed in white and it's purity, and they've got the purple and green sash, and it's big hats usually, which always a giveaway, big hat. So yeah, they thought that working women would just you know, they had to wait basically until the, you know, let the respectable middle class women get the vote, and then they'll sort out the rest later on, you know.
it really disappoints me, because I'm like, the attitude they have towards working class women is the attitude that men were having towards them. You know, I'm like, that it really jars for me that they had that. I'm really glad you've done a presentation on Sylvia, because I thought Sylvia was what her attitude, I thought that was what the movement was mostly about, and it really disappoints me actually that it wasn't, and that she was so like sidelined. Really, it doesn't surprise me actually saying it doesn't, and it doesn't surprise me that she's not really written about much and that she's been edited out of history, really. But I'm really glad you've done a talk on her. And
Well, the younger daughter, Adela, was actually sent off to Australia because she was more like Sylvia.
God.
And she actually got involved in the in Australian suffrage and movements and politics and socialist and all this business. So, you know, she was a bit of a embarrassment to a mother, sort of thing. But Sylvia, you know, they couldn't send her anywhere. She was she wouldn't go anywhere. You can see what sort of woman she was, you know.
Yeah. Good for her.
And in the end, I mean, Emmeline Pankhurst ended up as a member of the Conservative Party and wanting to stand in elections. So that you can see where they drifted further and further apart all the time, you know. And Christabel, she, like I say, she spent 2 years in France because she didn't want to get arrested, basically. Because she was encouraging other women to, you know, go on hunger strike and all this, but she didn't fancy that herself. So she basically stayed out of the way. And one of somebody from London would go over each week to Paris to get orders from her and what was going in the paper and things like that, and come back and do it. But she's just spent 2 years in Paris until the war started, and then came back to Britain. So, and yeah, like I said, is she saw the election of a Conservative government to be better prospect, you know. So
We only have to look at what goes on today when it comes to socialism and left-wing politics and all of the mechanisms in place to kind of prevent it. It makes more sense now that you're talking about Sylvia and what she was fighting for. It makes more sense what our politics is like today, in the sense that I think history is more conservative than what I realised it was actually. Oh, God. Madness.
She's a great kind of lesson in just get on with it, just do it, just do the stuff. Don't wait to get voted in. Don't wait for people to, you know, be on your side. Don't wait for, because then nothing happens. It's like, just do it, just get on with it. And I think she's fantastic for that. She always reminds me of that. You know, don't get embroiled in all these games.
Yeah.
All these political games that are played that are all about collusion and silencing. It's like, just do your stuff. And yeah.
Well, that was in the East End with the women in the East End. She was always, she wouldn't talk, you know, like she wouldn't talk down to them or try and tell them what they should do. It was always, what can we do together, sort of thing. And she was really forward thinking on women's issues generally. Like I say, she recognised the problems that forced women into things like prostitution. And she also advocated very early on in the East End. She sort of set up health clinics and baby clinics and things like this. And she actually wrote a pamphlet or an article advocating, saying that Britain should have some sort of national health service to help, you know, the poorer people give access to healthcare. And this is like 1920s, earlier than that.
What a shocking idea.
Yeah. So and actually it said that some of the ideas of the National Health Service actually came from the stuff she wrote years earlier. So, you know, she was really forward. She always seemed to sort of catch on quick to stuff and then just go, like you say, just go with it, not start debating it, just get on with it, basically, you know.
Yeah.
Quite encouraging, isn't it, to see that someone that, you know, we hardly ever hear of in lots of ways, in relation to, you know, her better known sibling and mother, has managed to impact our world today, you know, that and through direct action, you know, that thing with that attitude of no, you know, if voting changed anything, they'd ban it, that sort of thing, that kind of, you know, look, you can't wait that long for reform. You can't, you know, and you also can't say, well, we are the vanguard, you know, we middle class white women are the vanguard. And, you know, we get our vote in first. And then, you know, it's the trickle down effect, which is kind of the, you know, I think that's what the better known Pankhurst. Is that right, Steve? That I kind of get that, picking up that attitude that they were sort of very elitist and and just sort of,
they thought working class women weren't able to get together and do, you know, through lack of education or lack of morals. Sometimes Christabel became obsessed with sexual morality and things like that, you know. So, you know, working class women would, you know, well, they had to work and they had to do this and drudge, and they hadn't the time to think about nice things like they did. They could,
that freedom.
And the best way to do it is to get all the respectable ladies together, and that's how it worked.
Yeah.
But in fact, I mean, I know there's a lot of stuff about the Pankhurst and women's suffrage, but actually they were failing. They were failing towards the end, and they were, like I said in the thing, they were actually losing members because people were just fed up with the way they were. You know, it was basically run by Christabel from Paris, and the tactics just weren't working, and they weren't gaining any more influence or anything like that. And they always saw things in like a big national thing, national context. And Sylvia was working in the East End of London and basically was running a newspaper that was, like I say, self-sufficient and actually doing stuff. And it weren't on a national basis, but she had links with other places as well, and internationally as well. So her methods were actually seemingly getting further on. And I think when the war came, it sort of saved the Emmeline and Christabel, because they were actually funded by the government for a while to produce their paper, you know. And then, of course, women got the vote, and it was all attributed to it was attributed to all these women who had gone in the munitions factories and showed they could work, but they didn't get the vote. It was the the richer middle class women who got the vote. So, and then it was attributed to the suffragettes, you know, the Pankhurst, and did this and did that, but you know.
Because Vera Brittain said something about, you know, because she wrote Testament of Youth, didn't she? And she wrote something about, that was pretty scathing, actually. And I think she was aiming it at the Pankhurst, that that women got the vote because they willingly sacrificed their children to an imperial war. And that seemed to me a kind of shot at particularly Emmeline Pankhurst, because they espoused this crazy, mindless patriotism, you know, the sort that where you had women going around giving men who weren't in uniform white feathers. And you did have that, and she and Christabel, they went for that form of patriotism, which to me is shocking. You're actually giving up your sons and the sons of other women and the husbands of other women, and as well as, you know, the lives of those women who did go and get stuck in terms of, you know, be nursing and doing the Red Cross work and so on, that you're sacrificing all those lives for an ideal that, when you think about feminism now, you know, it's not that many feminists who are warmongers, let's face it. You know, it's a bit like saying that, you know, I don't know, it's a bit like saying Mennonites have a space program. It doesn't make sense at all that you're for people having a better life, and at the same time you're quite willing to contribute to that destruction. And also the idea that where all these nations are battling, this is all ruled by men. It's highly patriarchal organizations that actually run these countries in a way that is bad for men and women, because of very gendered ways of seeing things. So, you know, like horrible ideas of masculinity in wartime. You know, the idea of, if you're a pacifist, you were not a man. You know, if you were male and you were a pacifist or a conscientious objector, you weren't a proper man. And really, somebody who's fighting for votes for women, you think, oh, they're feminists. Well, actually, they're not. They're not in any meaningful sense, because what they are is a set of middle-class women who want the same legal rights as to vote as their middle-class male counterparts. They're not standing up for working-class women, and they're not standing up for the idea of workers of all nations either, you know, because, you know, what about, I don't know, it's just so, sorry, I'm wittering, but it just blows my mind that you can be so single-minded as to ignore the fact that, excuse me, over in Germany and Belgium and France and so on, there are a lot of women over there as well. And you're sending the sons and fathers of this nation off to kill their kids, and it doesn't add up. You know, it's like they had the blinkers on. They couldn't see the joined up bits, where if you look at what you've said about Sylvia's approach, she joins the dots and could actually analyze and see, you know, those moments of inappropriate power and where they need to be fought, and how you just do it local, but then you join it all together. And you don't see that, do you? With, you know, you never see that with the other Pankhursts. I do know that much. Like I said, I don't know, until now I haven't known much about Sylvia Pankhurst. I just knew that she was of all of them, you know, the one that was sort of most for middle class women. But it just seems so shocking.
It just sounds to me like the difference between conservative and socialist ideas, really. When I was listening to you then, Anne-Marie, I'm like, it is shocking when, even today, when I think of, you know, middle class people making the world better for, or it's not middle class people now even, it's, you know, the elite making the world better for the elite, and for the rest of everyone, just get on with it. The gap is growing bigger and bigger, and and that is shocking in itself, actually. And even today, socialist ideas, Sylvia today would have been rejected now as much as she was. She would be seen as a Jeremy Corbyn as well.
And demonised in the same way.
Absolutely, and much more clever hidden ways as well now with the technology that we've got. And it's really like the ideas that Sylvia had, I know you said she was forward thinking, it actually makes me wonder, are the same problems just not getting tackled through history? This system of keeping the wealthy just stays in power because they have the power to keep it that way. So 100 years later, we're still in the same situation where, yes, we have rights, more rights as women. There is a lot of talking the talk and not walking the walk going on, so it looks much better. And it is, that I can't deny that it is, but at the same time, there is still so much to be done as well. Inequality is still rife in our society.
There's still so much poverty around.
And it is, it's the same pattern.
I mean, the good thing about Sylvia is that she didn't judge people either. She, like when she in the war, if the doors were open for anybody to come in, they didn't have to be anti-war or anything, or conscientious objectors or anything. She took people on, you know, the women there, that she supported women whose husbands had volunteered to go and fight. You know, she didn't make any distinctions like that. It wasn't like, you know, you've got to have certain ideas and before all help. She just saw poverty and need, and she wanted to address it. So, you know, there was women who came there who probably were very patriotic or whatever, but it didn't matter because they needed help. So she, you know, and like I say, she was very aware of not just being charitable all the time. It was like trying to get people to help themselves together, you know. So,
she saw human beings, not human capital.
And
absolutely, we still have so far to go.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it?
So much further than we are.
Very often people judge the levels of equality that different categories of people have achieved, including women, by saying, look how far we've come. But actually, what we need to do is look how far we've got to go. That's the way you judge how far, you know, anybody has really got in terms of achieving any sort of equity. You know, and
in 2018, I went to London for the 100th anniversary of the Suffragettes, and I was one in 20,000 women who marched, and it was absolutely an amazing thing. And I got to speak to lots of different ladies, and one thing sticks in my mind. I spoke to this young girl who was 15, and I had a little book, and people wrote different things in my book for me, and she wrote, "What's a queen without her king? Quite simply better."
I didn't hear the last bit.
Quite simply better.
Oh, right.
Yeah. But what else fascinated me by all of this, that when we've got to Parliament, all around the House of Parliament was all barricaded, and they'd taken all the bins away. They must have thought we were going to blow up the bins. You know, they used to blow up the post boxes. There wasn't a bin anywhere to be seen. They'd taken them all away.
What a threat you must have been, all of you.
We were a threat. Yes, all these ladies. Yes.
Jeez.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but it was an absolutely amazing day to walk with so many people from so many different places up and down the country. Yeah, it was just amazing. So, yeah.
Did you carry banners?
We did carry banners, and I still have mine. It's at school.
Wow.
Yeah, we made banners. It was with the Artichoke Trust, and they organised it all. And lots of different groups made. There were some fabulous banners, absolutely fabulous banners, Anne-Marie. Some absolutely amazing banners. Yeah.
I would like to have seen that.
We'll take one for Sylvia.
So, sweetheart.
And
If we do another one, we can go and take a banner for Sylvia.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
but I'm just stunned by that. So that instead of you know our politicians coming out and and reflecting on this, this amazing movement and event in our history, they locked themselves in.
They did.
And barricaded.
Bins, because we were looking for places to put rubbish. I mean, we'd eaten stacks of things, and there's nowhere to put any rubbish. They'd moved all the bins, and it just reminded me of them blowing up the post boxes. They must have thought we were going to blow up the bins.
It's bizarre.
It makes you want to, though, doesn't it?
It does make you want to. Yeah, it makes you want to be a rebel. Yeah. Let's go buy a carb of soda and a bottle of Coke and stick it in a bin. And let it fizz out everywhere. They'll wonder what's going on.
Yeah, that
Let's go create some volcanoes inside the bins.
Because they know how far we've still got to go.
That's what
Anne-Marie
said, the very same thing. Look how far we've still got to go. We've got to go a huge way, because women still aren't being paid the same as men. They're still being dictated to on what they can and can't do in life.
Well, look at our American president of last year. I'm not being they went last year, didn't they? And he was elected and known to treat women the way he did, yet he was the president of America.
Look at our prime minister.
Look at our prime minister.
Not my prime minister.
No.
And one of the problems is
not my
that
circus, not my
a lot
monkeys.
of women seem to admire our prime minister and their president. Some women do. They just, I don't know why.
I know.
My old bosses actually said to a girl who went for a job, a woman who went for a job, "Are you planning on having any babies in the next 2 years? Because if you are, we don't think we can employ you."
That is illegal.
It's illegal, yeah.
Illegal.
You want to pay maternity pay. Oh God, you're going to have a baby. Yeah,
illegal.
Illegal. It's very much illegal.
I'm going to say it. It's muted.
You're muted, Nana. We didn't hear what you said then.
Oh, it used to be like that not so long ago. If you went for an interview, Yes. Had
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
chance to.
When I was about 22, 23, and I went for a job, and because I'd got children, they said, I don't think we can rely on you.
Oh.
That's what
Yeah.
they said, because you'd have, if your children are ill, you'll have to run to school to pick them up. So
Mm.
yeah, that's why I didn't get the job.
Oh.
Funny, they don't ask blokes if they've got kids.
No, they
No.
don't. No, they
No.
don't.
You look at now, like the cost of childcare. You know, like, I used to be a nurse, but I left nursing. One of the reasons being I didn't want to work a job for all of those hours per week that was so stressful, just to pay out for a nursery to look after my children, which would cancel out my wages immediately. I thought, what's the point in doing that? Yet we don't live in a society where one wage can care for a family and have a mortgage anymore. Far from it. So what do we do? What do young people, or any person who wants to get on the property ladder, who wants to try and make a life for themselves, you know, what do they do? But it is women particularly who then will go part-time to look after children who are seen as unskilled or de-skilled because they've had kids, and are then penalised for it and don't progress up the career ladder the same as men do, because men are protected to go to work. But at the same time, men only get 2 weeks paternity leave after a child is born, compared to a woman's year-long maternity,
which is ridiculous. You know, to me, it's ridiculous.
and you know,
I mean, I understand if a woman wants to breastfeed, etc., but if you're going to ever get a society where men and women are both good parents, going to have to start looking at, you know, paternity leave, and the culture around what happens in paternity leave changing quite a lot, because I've heard quite a lot of young women saying, well, what their husbands did for their paternity leave, they went golfing.
Oh.
Stuff like that. And I thought that sounds like divorce to me, quite honestly. You know, or decapitation would possibly be better.
I mean, my daughter, when she gave birth, because her and her husbands both work at the university, Edinburgh University, they've got a good package, so they both got 6 months paternity, maternity leave, so they took it in turn. But you know what, I think Francis stayed off for the first 6 months, and then Kieran stayed off for 6 months. But that's an exception now.
It is. Yeah,
really
that's
exceptional.
really
And Kieran, you know, it's not like he went golfing. He did look after it.
No, it's good dad.
But yeah, it should be like that.
Ideally, you'd have both. You'd have both parents off for a good amount of time to support each other, to support the child. And I still can't believe we don't live in a society that understands that. I'm like, what is so hard to understand about that? If we just had the
there's a total lack of support, though, isn't there, with childcare and
total lack of empathy. It's just a complete out of touch of people who can afford to have the life they have. Just do not and cannot empathize with people who haven't got that life. Men and women, they cannot empathize with people who haven't got that life, and can't make the link of the struggles that they have and then judge them for struggling.
Well, you can go by some of the remarks that recently been made by politicians about, well, women need to get back out to work then after they've had a baby. Well, who's going to look after the kids? And this guy, I can't think of his name, it's a Tory MP, said, well, why can't they get the nanny to look after the child? He just didn't understand it. Nanny?
Yeah.
That's what I used to call my grandma. I mean, he had it in his head that everybody gets a nanny. Just there you go, Claire. Talk about out of touch.
Honestly, and I'm like, and then God forbid if you're a single parent, because you know they don't exist. It absolutely blows my mind that we are meant to live in this modern, brilliant world, and yet when you talk about Sylvia Pankhurst and everything that she fought for, I'm like, God, that could have been 2 years ago, and that would not have surprised me. It wouldn't, because she's just it's just so frustrating, as you can tell.
So what are we going to do about it?
What are we going to organise?
Have to make some banners.
She's great. She's a great mascot actually for Bee-Tree, because this is, this is what Bee-Tree is about. It is about just do it. Don't sit around waiting for somebody else to do it.
Right, yes.
Don't wait for the, funding that is actually never going to come because nobody cares. If we want it, then you know what? We have to create it. So just do it.
Social justice is one of the reasons we
get it done.
Yeah.
And that we can do it. We can do it ourselves. And as long as we sit around waiting for the moneyed classes to throw us their coppers and make us fight over funding and all that shite, then, it's like we'll still be sitting here in 100 years' time. It's like we can do it ourselves and we need to do it ourselves because they won't do it for us. Have we not learned anything yet? They don't give a shit.
No.
And that's how it is. And I don't, I'll die before it changes, we've just got to do it. And so I think she's a great mascot for Bee-Tree, actually, because that's what we're about. So I think maybe we should find a way of putting in. Can she ride a bee?
Well, she had a bee in her bonnet, didn't she?
Yeah. Can we put a big hat on her with a bee on it, Claire?
Oh, yeah.
Go for the big hats.
I've just been frozen out for like 30 seconds.
Oh, but we've started the revolution without you, love.
Oh God! After all of that, did I just miss the start of the revolution?
Yeah.
You've got all the admin jobs.
Oh no!
Sylvia,
Should have spoke up.
We're gonna put a hat on her with a bee on it.
There's one thing I found out, which I didn't mention, is that apparently in 2018 there was a musical about Sylvia Pankhurst.
Wow!
What?
Musical
called Sylvia.
Oh,
It was put on by the I think of the old Vic Sadler's Wells.
This rings.
I don't know anything
there.
more about it really, but I only found out like today when I was looking at something. I was like, a musical.
Hold on.
It was as well.
It does ring a bell.
I don't know any of
there.
the songs or anything, but.
All right. Are you ready
So you
for
have to
this?
look it up and have a look, see if you can find it.
No, hold on.
What have you got?
You're about to screen share a trailer, aren't you?
What?
Can you see it?
Director and writer of
No.
Sylvia.
Oh, right.
oh yes.
These are 5 of the cast. They're going to give you a number from Sylvia. It's a new musical about the life of Sylvia Pankhurst and her involvement in the movement. The piece you're seeing is based in 1913, 10 years after the Women's Social and Political Union opened. This is my daughter doing this for her future. Thank you very much. Hey. Ooh, hey. Ooh, hey. Ooh, hey. Ooh, hey. Time's up. Hey. Time's up. Hey. Time's up. Hey. Time's up. Time's up. There'll be no more silence. Hey. Ooh, time's up. There'll be no more hiding. Hey. Ooh, time's up. There'll be no more waiting. Time's up. No longer will be tolerating your hating, your berating, your discriminating. Hey. Time's up. Hey. Time's up. Ooh. What's going on, Jay?
Hey.
Lord, since we made this house our home. And look how far we've come. We've come a long way. And look how far we've come. We've come a long way. I said stop, take a listen and wait a minute. Gonna stand up straight and talk. I said, stop, take a listen, can I take a minute? You ain't never gonna see us fool, cause we are soldiers. We are soldiers. We are soldiers on the battlefield. We are soldiers. Hey, we are soldiers. We are soldiers on the battlefield. We're good soldiers. We're good soldiers. Feet don't fail me now. I said we're good soldiers. We're good soldiers. Feet don't fail me now. Nothing can bring us down today. We've come a long way. I said nothing can bring us down today. We've come a long way. It's been 10 long years since my mother and I opened the door to our women's union. Look how far we've come. We've come a long way. Look how far we've come. We've come a long way. So, ladies, I welcome you here today. The stakes are high, but we are truly brave. Now is the time. I know we're under attack. Now is the time. But we've got your back. They can train us and train us, but they can't contain us. They can brain us and brain us, but they'll never tame us. March with me. March with me. Want equality. We have the right to be free. We are soldiers. We are soldiers. We are soldiers on the battlefield. Nothing can bring us down today. We've come a long way. I said, nothing can bring us down today. We've come a long way. 10 years I believe in you. We love you, Mrs. Pankhurst. 10 years you belong true. We love you, Mrs. Pankhurst. We've been giving our links and our west. I'm for testify for us. To fight for you right now is the time. Women step out in the shadow. Now is the time. Step towards the light. All the sun and revolution in your hands. And march, women, march. Oh yeah. March, women, march. Let's go. March, women, march. March, women, march. We are soldiers, women, soldiers. 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 I say march, women march. I say march, women march. I say we come a long way, women march.
Wow.
There you go.
That's
That's
good.
on YouTube.
Yay.
You can find more of that. Yeah, I remember that now, Steve. I'd forgotten all about that.
I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah, yeah.
Mind
I
you, I'm not
remember
one for
it.
musicals, so.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Steve. That was
it's
fantastic.
Brilliant. Yeah.
It is
Oh,
fantastic.
Next time it's
Thanks, Steve.
Rah Rah Rasputin,
Yay!
cover of the Russian Queen. And then,
Are we're gonna have the song.
oh yeah, I'll do a
Yeah.
solo version. Of course I will. And then I'll have to, the two in June, I'll have to think about what we want to do.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, we'll do.
Fabulous.
So
Right then, everybody, we're gonna have to shoot off because we've got a host meeting.
a host meeting.
We're all fired up now, though.
I know. me and Claire have to
It's just
contain
invited,
ourselves
isn't it?
now for a host meeting. Hello?
Are you just inviting us into that? Do I need to find it somewhere else?
It's in your emails.
Oh my God, which emails?
Did Kate
Katie sent an email.
Right, it'll be on my Kindle then. I'll have to go and get my Kindle and send it to
I
the
can
email
send it
address.
on WhatsApp
Okay,
as well.
brilliant.
What, sorry, sweets?
I can send it to you on WhatsApp.
Yeah, I'll come in on my phone then. I'm on my computer at the minute.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Steve. Again,
You're welcome.
fantastic.
Yes, thank you
Thanks for
very
the
much.
discussion.
Deb,
Gonna
I've
go
had,
and
I've had an idea. I'll text you.
Huh?
You start or January, start of
Oh, I
November.
think we're on a march.
I think it might be better than that, actually.
I'm going to post a picture of one of the banners from the
Oh,
lovely.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
brilliant.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
you all later. Bye-bye.
Bye,
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 everybody.
everybody. Cheers.
Bye.